China Airlines Flight 642 is making its approach to Hong Kong International Airport amidst the severe conditions brought on by Tropical Storm Sam. The aircraft is buffeted by strong winds and heavy rain as it descends, causing passengers to grip their armrests tightly while turbulence rattles the cabin. The relentless sound of rain pounding against the fuselage, coupled with sudden altitude drops, heightens the anxiety of everyone on board. Outside, visibility is nearly non-existent, and intermittent flashes of lightning contribute to the already tense atmosphere. The pilots are acutely aware of the dangers but proceed with the landing approach. However, as they emerge from the clouds and spot the runway, unforeseen challenges arise, testing their skills and concentration to the utmost. Will their training and experience suffice to ensure a safe landing? This narrative centers on China Airlines Flight 642, which is set for its journey on August 22, 1999, from Bangkok to Taipei, with a scheduled stop in Hong Kong. The flight is operated by a McDonnell Douglas MD-11, a long-haul aircraft that is 7 years old, having been manufactured in October 1992 and equipped with 3 robust engines. Previously operated by Mandarin Airlines, the aircraft still bears its original livery despite its recent transfer to China Airlines. It had endured 2 hard landings in the past. The first in February 1995 resulted in damage to the nose gear, which was subsequently repaired. Following another hard landing in August 1997, a comprehensive inspection revealed no further issues. At the time of this flight, the MD-11 was in good working order, with no unresolved technical concerns. On board Flight 642 were 300 passengers and 15 crew members, the same crew that had operated the outbound flight. The journey from Taipei to Bangkok commenced the previous day, with a stop in Hong Kong, where the early impacts of Tropical Storm Sam were already being felt. In mid-August, an area of circulation over the Philippine Sea developed into Tropical Storm Sam, which subsequently intensified into a typhoon as it neared the Chinese coast on the day of the flight. The typhoon's approach brought record-breaking rainfall and strong winds to Hong Kong, with over 616 mm of rain recorded, the highest since 1884, and gusts reaching 35 knots near the international airport. During the pre-flight briefing, updated weather reports indicated the storm's intensifying presence around Hong Kong, prompting the crew to prepare for high crosswinds, severe turbulence, and limited visibility in the hours leading up to departure. Air traffic control noted nearly 10 go-arounds, as multiple flights aborted their landings due to hazardous conditions. In light of these circumstances, the captain opted to load additional fuel, allowing for the possibility of circling in a holding pattern, attempting a go-around, or diverting directly to Taipei if necessary. With the extra fuel, the flight was projected to land just over 200 kg below the aircraft's maximum allowable landing weight, which, while providing additional stability, required a higher approach speed for a successful landing on the first attempt. As departure time neared, the crew conducted their final pre-flight checks while passengers settled into their seats. Once the checks were completed and passengers secured, the cabin crew closed and locked the doors in preparation for pushback. The tug positioned itself after receiving clearance from ground control and subsequently pushed the aircraft away from the gate. Once the engines were ignited and the pushback maneuver was completed, the captain and first officer conducted final system checks. Satisfied that everything was functioning properly, they commenced taxiing toward the runway. The captain, a 57-year-old Italian national, had previously served with a major European airline before joining China Airlines in 1997. By this flight, he had amassed nearly 18,000 flight hours, including over 3,000 hours on the MD-11. The first officer, aged 36 and originally from Taiwan, had been with China Airlines since 1989, logging more than 4,600 flight hours, with nearly 3,000 on the MD-11. After a few minutes of taxiing, the aircraft arrived at the runway, having received clearance from air traffic control. The captain advanced the 3 thrust levers to takeoff thrust, causing the engines to roar as the aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting off smoothly and beginning its ascent to cruising altitude. Once they reached level flight, operations proceeded as planned. The cabin crew completed their in-flight service, allowing passengers to relax for the remainder of the journey. As China Airlines Flight 642 approached Hong Kong, conditions around the airport deteriorated significantly. In the cockpit, the crew diligently monitored these worsening conditions via the Automatic Terminal Information Service, ATIS, a continuous broadcast that provides real-time updates on weather, active runways, and approach conditions, ensuring that pilots remain well informed. Air traffic control was contacted directly, and each update was designated using the NATO phonetic alphabet, such as Alpha and Bravo. The broadcast issued warnings regarding severe weather conditions, which included significant wind shear, intense turbulence, and low visibility. Surface winds were reported from 320 at 30 knots, with gusts reaching 45 knots amidst heavy rainfall. Given that the runway was oriented at 250, this created a crosswind component of 26 knots, slightly exceeding the airline's wet runway limit. Nevertheless, the captain observed that the wind direction was gradually shifting, with hopes that it would alleviate sufficiently to allow for a safe landing. Approximately 30 minutes later, at 6:14, radar control authorized the aircraft to commence its descent. In the interim, conditions had altered slightly, and a new broadcast labeled X-ray provided updated information, indicating surface winds from 3 at 35 knots, resulting in a crosswind component of around 25 knots, still marginally above the company's wet runway limit. Flight 642 initiated its descent as the initial signs of the tropical storm became apparent, with deteriorating weather conditions ahead. The crew requested a course adjustment, which air traffic control approved, assigning a new heading to navigate around the storm cell. As they maneuvered through the turbulent weather, the captain began preparing for an approach to runway 25 left, which the latest update had confirmed as the active runway. However, midway through the briefing, the first officer interjected, asserting that they were actually cleared for runway 25 right. Trusting the first officer's assertion, the captain chose not to contest it further, and they proceeded with their preparations as planned, despite the confusion regarding the runway assignment. Flight 642 successfully navigated through the most severe turbulent conditions, and air traffic control subsequently instructed them to proceed toward waypoint Mango as they continued their descent. At 6:25, the crew transitioned to approach control, which initiated radar vectoring for what they still anticipated would be an ILS approach to runway 25 right. As they descended further, the flight encountered deteriorating weather conditions in the vicinity of Hong Kong, with increasing rain and wind prompting the crew to activate the aircraft's anti-ice system to mitigate ice accumulation on critical surfaces such as the wings and engines. Passengers in the cabin experienced the effects of the storm, with the aircraft shaking in the gusty winds, rain battering against the windows, and flashes of lightning illuminating the surrounding clouds. In the cockpit, the crew monitored a warning broadcasted by Hong Kong Approach, alerting all nearby aircraft that a recent arrival had suffered a lightning strike at approximately 400 feet during its approach, serving as a stark reminder of the challenging conditions they were about to face. Acknowledging this warning, the crew began to configure the aircraft for landing, extending the slats and subsequently setting the flaps to 15 in preparation for their final approach. As they approached the airfield, Hong Kong approach directed the aircraft to a heading of 230 and cleared them for an ILS approach to runway 25 left. It was at this moment that the pilots recognized the runway mix-up, necessitating an immediate rebriefing on the correct procedures. Under increased pressure, the captain promptly reviewed the minimums and go-around procedures. Despite the additional workload, the crew adjusted seamlessly and refocused their ILS approach for runway 25. The Instrument Landing System, ILS, is a precise radio navigation system that offers short-range guidance to aircraft as they approach a runway. While it can be utilized in any weather conditions, it is particularly beneficial during adverse weather or low visibility scenarios, such as those resulting from a tropical storm. The ILS operates through two primary types of radio signals, the localizer and the glide slope. The localizer assists pilots or the autopilot in maintaining alignment with the runway's center line, indicating whether the aircraft is deviating too far to the left or right and guiding it back to the correct trajectory. The glide slope aids pilots in managing the aircraft's descent angle, ensuring it adheres to the proper slope toward the runway, and indicates whether the aircraft is too high or too low during the approach. Approximately 14 nautical miles from touchdown, the aircraft was handed over to Hong Kong Tower and instructed to continue its approach. The crew received updated information regarding visibility, which was at 1,600 meters, and surface winds from 320 degrees at 25 knots, gusting to 33 knots. This wind condition exceeded the crosswind limit. The captain decided to proceed, planning to reassess conditions below 1,000 feet with the autopilot and auto-throttle engaged. The aircraft successfully captured both the localizer and glide slope, and the landing gear was deployed as they neared the runway. The crew diligently monitored airspeed and crosswind angles, cognizant that the challenging weather could impact the aircraft's stability. In preparation for landing, the crew set the auto brake to medium, armed the spoilers, and extended the flaps to 35 degrees, configuring the MD-11 for a full landing. The landing process up to this stage had proceeded without significant issues, despite earlier confusion regarding the runway. The crew adeptly managed the descent, maneuvering the aircraft closer to the runway in increasingly adverse weather conditions. At an altitude of 1,000 feet above ground level, visibility was severely restricted due to the torrential rain, with only sporadic breaks in the storm clouds. As they approached the final stages of their descent, tension mounted in the cockpit, as the crew anticipated the most difficult challenges ahead. At approximately 700 feet, the captain opted to disengage the autopilot, assuming manual control of the descent while keeping the auto-throttle engaged to regulate airspeed. As they neared the runway, the lights became discernible through the rain. The captain made the decision to proceed with the approach, despite receiving a final wind report indicating a crosswind of 32 degrees at 28 knots, gusting to 36 knots, which was slightly above the acceptable limit. Inside the cabin, passengers experienced the full force of the storm, with flashes of lightning serving as a stark reminder of the perilous conditions surrounding the airport. The sound of rain pounding against the fuselage and the strong gusts buffeting the aircraft heightened the anxiety among those on board, all of whom were securely fastened, awaiting a safe landing. In the cockpit, the windshield wipers were set to their highest speed, struggling against the deluge, which occasionally obstructed the captain's view and compounded the challenging circumstances. Although the MD-11 was slightly below the glide slope, it maintained its trajectory along the runway centerline, with the captain employing a technique known as crabbing, angling the aircraft's nose to counteract the crosswind. As the aircraft navigated into the crosswind to maintain its alignment with the runway, everything appeared to be proceeding smoothly. However, upon reaching an altitude of 300 feet, the crew noticed a sudden decrease in indicated airspeed. The first officer promptly alerted the captain by calling out the speed, highlighting the unexpected drop. In response, the captain advanced the throttles, increasing the airspeed to 175 knots, which was approximately 15 knots above the intended speed. Recognizing the need for correction, he quickly reduced the thrust to regain control over the airspeed. As the thrust diminished, the aircraft descended through the 50-foot mark, which activated the auto-throttle system, bringing the engines to idle in preparation for landing. At this critical juncture, the airspeed decreased rapidly, likely due to an abrupt loss of headwind coupled with the premature reduction in thrust. This situation resulted in a significant loss of lift, causing the descent rate to accelerate to a perilous 18 feet per second. The captain attempted to execute a flare by pulling back on the control column to raise the nose. However, despite a slight lift of the nose, the descent rate remained excessively high. Moments later, the right main landing gear made a forceful impact with the runway, collapsing outward and initiating a series of structural failures. Almost immediately, the right engine cowling struck the runway, tearing open upon impact and further destabilizing the aircraft. The right wing detached, igniting spilled fuel and causing the aircraft to flip upside down, sliding across the runway engulfed in flames before finally coming to rest off to the side, shrouded in smoke and fire. The cockpit crew, disoriented by the inverted position of the aircraft, struggled to locate the engine controls and faced significant challenges in executing their emergency procedures. Following the completion of their shutdown procedures, the crew successfully liberated themselves and proceeded through the cockpit door into the cabin. They exited the aircraft via the L1 door and began assisting passengers through a breach in the fuselage. The emergency services response was activated immediately upon the occurrence of the crash, with alarms sounding throughout the airport. Fire and rescue units were mobilized within seconds, and emergency crews arrived at the crash site within 1 minute. The situation was intricate, as the MD-11 was positioned inverted, with sections of the fuselage and wing engulfed in flames, and passengers trapped inside. Despite the heavy rainfall, the flames burned fiercely due to fuel leakage, complicating containment efforts. The crash of China Airlines Flight 642 resulted in 3 fatalities and left 50 passengers and crew members with serious injuries. The swift response of the rescue teams significantly reduced the potential for additional casualties. The investigation determined that the primary cause of the accident was the captain's failure to halt the rapid descent rate when at 50 feet above the runway. Contributing factors included the captain's inability to notice and respond to the decreasing airspeed and increasing descent rate, as well as the reduction of thrust to flight idle. Variations in wind direction and speed may have led to a temporary loss of headwind, resulting in a sharp decline in airspeed just prior to touchdown. Additionally, limited side visibility during the landing flare may have hindered the captain's ability to detect the rapid descent rate in a timely manner. In response, China Airlines revised its standard operating procedures for landings in adverse weather conditions and enhanced crew training to improve management of unstable approaches and high-pressure situations.